This video will get into the distributive property, what it is and how to use it. But before we get there, it's really important that you do number 1 through 5 using order of operations to simplify each expression. If you don't do this first, then you will be losing some meaning of what the distributive property actually is. So pause the video and come back when you're done, and please show your work while you're doing it. How did it go? Here are your answers. Now let's talk about the distributive property. We're going to take exercises 1 through 3 and do them another way. Instead of using the order of operations and adding what's inside the parentheses first, I'm going to take that number that's being multiplied outside of the parentheses and multiply it to each number inside the parentheses. So 3 times 4 is 12. And then I will add to that the 3 times 7, which is 21. 21 plus 12 is 33, which is the same answer we got doing it using the order of operations. Let's do number 2. Again, instead of adding what's inside the parentheses, I'm going to take this negative 2, which is being multiplied to that quantity, and multiply it by each number individually. So negative 2 times 5 is a negative 10. Negative 2 times 6 is a negative 12. So we can add a negative 12 to that. And when we do that, we get negative 22. Again, the same answer we got earlier. Finally, number 3. Instead of adding these together, I'm going to take the number outside of the parentheses, which is being multiplied to it, and I'm going to multiply each term inside the parentheses by it. So negative 1 times a negative 9 is a positive 9 plus a negative 8. And when you simplify that, you get a 1. Again, that's what we got in the first case. And this all works because of the distributive property. Now be careful to understand that the distributive property is not magic, and it's not something to memorize. It's just merely a situation that exists. If I have 3 times the quantity 4 plus 7, and I set that equal to itself, it just means I can solve it in 2 different ways, or simplify it. I can use the order of operations by adding what's inside the parentheses first, but if I chose to hand it out to each number inside the parentheses separately, then I would end up with the same result. The answer will be the same no matter which way you do it. Now, the distributive property only works when it's a multiplication of a number outside a quantity or parenthesis. Again, it has to be multiplication. However, it could be subtraction in here. That would be okay. You could still use the idea of the property. But don't confuse the part that it's multiplication and addition or subtraction used together. It's always nice to use the English language in math to help you remember what you're being asked to do. They came up with the word distributive property to help describe what it's doing. Distributing means to give out. So if you remember that that number outside can be handed out or given out to each number inside, that's just the essence of the distributive property. Here's another picture of what it looks like. Now that we know what the distributive property is, let's use it to rewrite these problems. Again, like it says in the red, I want you to use the arrows until we get really good at it. So rewriting it, we're going to hand out the 2 to the 6, and then we'll hand out the 2 to the 4. And you can simplify it. It helps check answers. But again, this part is the most important. And again, this is multiplication going on here between that 3 and those parentheses. So 3 times 4 will get added to 3 times 2. Letter C is still the distributive property. It's still multiplication times a quantity. And you can either move the 4 to the other side if you like it on the left-hand side, or just distribute it from where it already is. Your arrows might look like they're going backwards. That's okay. So you get a 4 times the 7 plus a 4 times a 3. Again, any questions on that you need to ask. 3 times an 8 plus the 3 times a 1. And these might have had subtraction symbols or subtraction signs, but nothing would have changed except you would have minus signs. Now here is where it gets fun. The distributive property turns out to be critical when we're trying to solve equations. If I was given a problem like letter E, there would be nothing I could do. I don't know what X is, and I don't know what C is. All we can do at this point is simplify it a little bit using again the distributive property. I'm going to take the 7 and hand it out to the X. That just means 7 times X, which is just 7X. Do the same thing with the C. 7 times the C is just 7C. And there's nothing else we can do to this expression at this point. Letter F. Y is being distributed to the 4 plus 2. Using the distributive property rather than the order of operations, we can take the y times the 4, which gives us 4y, and the y times the 2, which gives us 2y. X times 2x. Well, be careful there. X times x, that's a repeated multiplication of x 2 times. So that becomes x squared. X times 3, that's 3x. And it's just generally the rule that you write the numbers before the letters. So if you wondered why I switched them around, it was just to follow the rule. Here's some examples with minus signs. I'll do the first couple with you and then you can finish. Our first example is 2 times this quantity, 3 minus 4. You're going to distribute the 2 times the 3. And there's two things you can do right now. You can either change this into an addition statement by using the plus a negative idea like our KCO, keep change opposite. You could also think of that as just a minus sign and rewrite that down. And then do the 2 times the 4, which also works. They have the same idea. Your answer here will end up to be a negative 2. So once again, I need to distribute the 4 to the 5 and the 2. So I will say 4 times 5 minus this 4 times 2. 20 minus 8 is 12. Pause the video and do the last 3. Yours should generally look like this. You could have your letters reversed, and that would still be okay because it's multiplication. Alright, let's look at what happens with negative signs involved. Letter M says a negative 2 times 2 plus 3, and using that distributive property just means I need to remember my integer rules. I like to put parentheses around my numbers just to make sure I'm grouping my negatives with the right number. You don't have to necessarily, it's the way I do it. So I get a negative 2 times a positive 2, so that's going to be a negative 4. And then a negative 2 times 3 is a negative 6. Letter N. Negative 4 times 3 plus a negative 4 times 4, which is a negative 12 plus a negative 16. Remember, same signs add, so I will get a negative 28 for my answer. You try the last 4. Pause the video. And here are your results. Some of these can be tricky, and there's always more than one way to do things. Make sure your end results match mine, but the way to get there could look different. Let me know if you have any questions, and pause the video if you need to look at your answers in depth.